Welcome to Your Seat at the Table. I'm Tammy Smith, your host. Today's table conversation is still not ready to put yourself out there? I'm going to have a real heart-to-heart talk with anyone who is struggling with getting themselves past a current limitation. Like if you've hit a plateau and there's something that you need to do, but it's hard to put yourself out there. It's hard to take a risk, to stand for something, and even for yourself, for your own development. It can be really terrifying to put yourself out there in the world. Well, it often feels like, what's wrong with me? Or is this a self-esteem issue? Am I afraid of failure? Am I afraid of success? You know, the thing is that it really hurts when you aren't putting yourself out there because you're not living in what you know to be your full authenticity. There's a part of you that's trying to push forward. It's like it knows its birthright is to come into its own, to flower. I don't think there's anything that really captures this human blossoming more than when somebody becomes more of themselves when they begin to flower. It's a very vulnerable time because something new is emerging within you. It's like this creative self is unfolding, and it's tender. And there's no doubt that you fear being judged. On one hand, you're wondering, who am I to do this? And on the other hand, you're wondering, why not me, right? So don't worry. If you are feeling this way, you're not alone. And I think what we'll do is unravel a few threads here that are going to help you to understand, accept, and reverse that pattern that holds you back. So first of all, I want to pose this question. So why do you think people invest so much money in their personal brand image? I think we can all agree that in this day and age, with the millions of competing brands for a really similar space, you have to be able to explain, what you do in a way that the average person can understand quickly, right? So a personal brand gives you a recognizable stereotype in the world. So this not only makes you feel safe about putting yourself out there in this brand, but it also makes other people feel safe about who they think you are. But this personal branding thing is just like, it's freakishly difficult for some people to be able to identify yourself, to put yourself in a box and say, this is who I am, what I do, why it matters, why you should follow me and buy my products, read my books or blogs. The more complex you are, or multi-passionate, or if you are in a transitional time of life, it is maddening to come up with that singular, concise way to describe a brand. Having this recognizable, repeatable brand is the new normal. And of course, if you're going to do it, you're going to want to do it right. So you'll look to see how others are positioning their brand or themselves. And as you start to compare, you'll also notice there's a tendency to favor that which is familiar. And it is an instinct. When our ancestors were out picking berries, they needed to stay with the ones that they knew, the familiar ones, because if they weren't, they could be poisoned. So it's a matter of life and death. Our fight or flight reflex is rooted deep in that ancient part of our brain. And our instincts tell us that familiar equals safety. And if you're starting a business or trying to get word out about your book or your podcast or blog, you know what you will hear from most marketing gurus, and that is that originality is a sin. Don't do it. There's a reason why the magazine headlines have pretty much stayed consistent over the last 50 years. It's a template and they're proven formulas, but they work because when you're trying to capture someone's attention, it has to be familiar and it has to be simple. So there's only so many ways you can write a headline that fit those two criteria. And it's similar with, a blog post. They are going to follow a real similar pattern as well. Websites follow the same trends. There's a reason why there is social proof. In other words, you'll see all the magazines that this person or brand has been featured in because that makes you feel safe. And it's the same reason that celebrities are paid millions of dollars to endorse a product, and it's because people like to see familiar faces. In this guidedselling.org, there's a post on the psychology behind celebrity endorsements, and the gist of it is that Of course, the human brain recognizes celebrities, and because they're familiar, it's as if we're receiving advice from a valued friend. It's just that consumers will feel more sympathetic toward a brand if the products are promoted by a celebrity they admire or relate to. I think that what's more disturbing is the studies that show that we are more swayed when we hear statements of opinion and persuasive messages more than once. The more we hear something, the more we'll take it to be true. And that this is what psychologists call the illusion of truth effect. And this arises mostly because familiarity breeds liking. If we're exposed to a message again and again and again, it becomes familiar. And what's familiar then becomes true. So let's switch gears and then we'll come back around to this familiar is safe idea. Albert Carr wrote a book in 1968 called Business as Game. And the book presented that business is a competition with its own set of rules that are not synonymous with society's broader ethical standards. So he says business is more like a poker game in which it's acceptable to bluff an opponent in order to win. And because everyone is aware that this is the way things are done, these deceitful business practices become the norm, commonplace, convention, and so they fall under conventional ethics. In this scenario, if you're conducting business at a higher ethical standard, you are at risk being undercut by the less than ethical competitor. And we now find ourselves with a president who holds the same worldview and treats politics as a game as well. We want to be really careful about this illusion that whatever is familiar is safe, because along with it becomes a reluctancy to challenge status quo. Our attitude becomes, well, that's just the way it's done. And to say anything or speak out against it, that's pretty risky. It's easier just to play it safe. And this way of seeing what's the use, why bother to change anything, it's this helplessness, powerlessness, and it actually goes even deeper than that. And this is both the Judeo-Christian and Muslim religions teach something really similar, and that's that God loves you, but he causes bad things to happen sometimes, like hurricanes and earthquakes and diseases. It wasn't very long ago televangelist Jim Bakker said that Hurricane Harvey was God's judgment on America for our sins, those sins of legalized abortion and LGBTQ people having rights. Baker was joined by right-wing Pastor Rick Joyner, who said, that storm has nothing to do with climate change. The real issue with the weather and everything else on earth has to do with sin and wickedness. They're saying that we've brought these things upon ourselves. So rather than blame the storms on weather patterns or an illness on a physical cause, you don't want to risk upsetting the apple cart, and you certainly don't want to risk upsetting God. So we pay this really high price for our illusion of safety. Eventually, push comes to shove, we can only swallow so much poison. So the first thing is just to realize that we are going to have a natural drive to want to look the same, to sound the same, as a way of empowering ourselves, paradoxically. It's the same, only better. And the thing is, it's really hard to break through these barriers when you don't know what they are. So I think that the more we can, have these discussions and put these things on the table and acknowledge the way that some of these unconscious fears and this old brain instincts really take over our ability to see things clearly and realistically, how they are. The more we can address that, the easier it will be to break through these barriers. So that's the first half, but there's more to the story. There's other reasons why it's hard to put yourself out there. And these are less of the internal struggle and more of some situations in life. And I've been working as a business coach online for 10 years, and I've worked with people at all different various stages of their life and in their business. And so I'm going to give you what I think are the top 3 themes that I see when people are struggling here. And so one of the things I hear is, I don't want to put myself out there because my message is fuzzy. It's not well developed. And I want to make sure that it's perfect, before I start building that platform. The second thing is I don't want to put myself out there because I don't want to look like a narcissist clamoring for attention. It just feels so uncomfortable to be that kind of self-promoting person. And the third one is I don't want to put myself out there because I'm sensitive in private. So let's start with that, number 3. I don't want to put myself out there because I'm sensitive in private. I certainly understand the fear, but the thing is, the odds are you will have a much bigger problem trying to be seen and heard. I used to work as an SEO consultant, helping people boost their blogs and websites through organic search engine strategies, and it's a lot of work. And you have to work really hard to be found, out there in the mass of information. You can publish without becoming some sort of celebrity, or you don't have to worry about that much attention, to be honest. The sensitivity part, though, I get that too, and it can feel like a curse, but it is such a gift. I would encourage you to use that sensitivity because it's going to enable you to address things at a deeper level and in a way that people that are less sensitive will just, kind of brush under the rug or they'll run over it, right? So it gives you this ability to really be honest. And that's all it takes. You would be amazed at what a drop of honesty and integrity can do in this environment we live in. You could have such a powerful effect on someone. You could give them the courage to do something that they need to do. I remember a number of years ago, I was reading a blog post by Nicole Antoinette. And she doesn't have that blog up anymore, but at the time she was taking a sabbatical, and she wrote on the blog post that she was tempted just to say that she was taking a sabbatical and to let people assume that she's doing that because she's doing so well. And so she, kind of fought with herself, and then she decided to come clean and to say, the only reason I'm taking this sabbatical is because I have a husband who is supporting my business. And I found it so refreshing and honest and courageous of her, because she could have continued to put that image out there that that things were better than they are. And I heard on a podcast just a few weeks ago, a couple people kind of laughing about the fact that, well, everyone knows, that when you see people on Instagram, that's not really true. Their life isn't good like that. They're just posing. That I think they even went so far as to say, nobody's really happy. So don't be a sucker and believe, what you see. When there's that drive to, fit in and to look the part takes over, we find ourselves in really muddy water. And so even if you're sensitive, if you can use that sensitivity to become even more passionate about honesty, it can make such a big difference. So let's talk about the second one, that you don't want to look like a narcissist clamoring for attention and likes. A lot of people feel this way at first, but again, if you're sincere, it's more about telling your story, and it's just simply sharing at a more personal level, and that's vulnerable as well. But once you start to do it, I can testify for both myself and a number of clients that once they started to put more of themselves into their brand, the brand became less serious and they started having a lot more fun. So the last one, if you don't want to put yourself out there because your message is still fuzzy and not well developed, I'm going to quote James Hillman here. He says, "Ideas are like children. You should try to get your children into the world, if possible, to defend them and help them along." He says, "I don't think it's enough just to write and throw it out in the world. I think it's useful to have to put yourself out there for what you believe." Your message will develop as you go. You can't keep a baby locked up until it's ready to walk. It has to be loved, encouraged to roll over, to crawl, to stand before it can walk. So invest in it. Invest in yourself and your ideas. Get them out there. Believe in them. Let them evolve. Nobody expects you to be an expert in anything other than your niche and other than your story. And it's so worth the struggle. You're worth it. And as women, this isn't new. I remember coming across the works of Emily du Châtelet, who was this French noblewoman in like 1740. She's often known as Voltaire, one of Voltaire's lovers, but she's really this very brilliant mathematician and philosopher, and her works are incredible. What really got my attention was that her sentiments and struggles were really reflective of our own still today. She wrote, "I feel all the weight of the prejudice that universally excludes women from the sciences. It's one of the contradictions of this world that's always astonished me, that there are great countries whose destiny the law permits us to rule, and yet there's no place where we're taught to think." So she had to overcome the cultural prejudice, and she said that it wasn't just cultural. She had to overcome her own prejudice. In other words, those beliefs were in her as well. And it's often more difficult to encounter that saboteur within than those without. And let's remember Gerda Lerner, who wasn't just a historian, but she was one of the first women's historians. And she was described as this very forceful presence, demanding that women stand on their own feet and think for themselves and learn from history. She said, "I was a laughingstock because I insisted that women had a history." And she was told, "Hey, you have a brilliant academic career ahead of you. You should just abandon that outlandish idea." But she refused. Not only did she have to fight like hell, but she continued to encourage other women to fight like hell, to own their contribution, and to take their rightful place. And today's inspiring Elizabeth Gilbert, I love how she's encouraging especially women to commit to what we most love and to face what we most fear. And she talks about at 19 sending in short stories for publications, and over the years she said she had this massive pile of rejection notes. She says, "I don't really know why I had the confidence to send off those short stories at 19 to the New Yorker, or why it didn't destroy me when I was inevitably rejected. Should I think it was just because I figured I would be?" But she was wise enough to think, hey, someone has to write these stories, why not me? And she continues to inspire and encourage others to put it out there, because we all have that opportunity to make a difference, to identify a problem or opportunity in our community, to share our stories, to share our hearts, to provide leadership. You know, we're being invited right now to participate in a very extraordinary evolutionary adventure. The poet David Whyte wonders why we are the one terrible part of creation privileged to refuse our own flowering. So let me ask you again, are you ready to put yourself out there? There's only 3 things that you'll need to do to start. 1, eliminate ambiguity. Get specific about what you care about and what you are afraid of. And then rid yourself of the illusion that familiar equals safe and easy to understand means it's true.